Hi, I'm Elizabeth Herbert. In 2015, we had what was called the Pinery fire, in which thousands of animals lost their lives. Many horses were burnt. This is our experience taking care of some of the horses that did survive. This presentation was prepared for America, so I'm hoping you know where South Australia is. As an overview, in January 2015, the Samson Flat Fire burned 49,000 acres in 2 days. In September of 2015, the Valley Fire in Middletown, California, which is my old stomping grounds, burned 77,000 acres in 2 days. Our Pinery Fire burned 225,000 acres in 5 hours. It was one of the fastest recorded fires moving in history. We were allowed to drive out and attend some horses that were just beyond the zone where everybody was being stopped. So what do you take? What do you bring? How do you know who to save? And the initial treatments. Those are things that we're going to go over. So we were confronted with a pretty horrific scene. We had actually 4 horses burned. One did not survive, by the way. And they didn't look too bad to begin with, but their faces, their muzzles especially, were burnt. They all had corneal ulcers, and on several of them the coronary bands were oozing. What do you take when you go out? Well, we really weren't prepared. We had flamazine, we had SSD cream, we had flunixin, we had eye ointments. The number one thing you want to do is, if you're the owner, is you want to put some water to cool the horses down, but you don't want ice water and you don't want cold water. You just want basic tap water. However, realistically speaking, if a fire of that nature's gone through, there's no infrastructure left, and there was no water running any place that we went the first night. It's a good idea to take some cling wrap or some kind of wrap to put over the top of these burns. Corneal ulcers were very common. Every single horse had corneal ulcers, despite very minor burns, and they were pretty easy to treat. We put them on a triple antibiotic ointment, usually twice a day, and we put them on a long-acting cattle eye ointment, cloxacillin or Benin at the time, once a day, which seemed to give them some pain relief. We used that until we had a negative stain uptake, which usually took about 2 weeks, and then we switched over to a steroid cream. We didn't see any fungal keratitis. We looked a couple times and didn't see anything. You need to be prepared to do tetanus prophylaxis. We did tetanus toxoid vaccine in the horses with a known history, and we did antitoxin if they had no history, and tetanus toxoid at the same time in different sites. Obviously, you shouldn't be driving up into a fire scene. The fire had passed a couple hours before. One of my nurses had lost 4 horses and was begging me to come up. My receptionist lost her house and 1 horse, and she was asking as well. So we did go up, probably not recommended. We received a lot of advice. Nobody had exactly protocols for this because it was rather new. Most horses are burned in barn fires, and their burns are usually on their back and head. These were ventral and down to the feet. So we talked to some Australian veterinarians who kindly gave us some advice. We talked to a local human burn specialist, Dr. Greenwood, who came over, looked at us, our horses, assessed them, offered assistance in skin transplants, and gave us some very expensive medicine for the horses that helped. And then also Cheryl Rosiak, who was a burns nurse who had worked in rural communities before, and she had some very practical knowledge that was quite valuable to us. In planning for this, we knew that these people had lost a lot of their possessions and were under severe financial stress. So we decided we would try to do this and not charge them anything and only use our own services and employ other people to help us with these horses and try to raise money for it. One of the most important parts was getting the staffing in. So we created a website and people called in and volunteered their services, and we had a range which was really good. We had great horse handlers, we had small animal nurses, large animal nurses, we had even human burns nurses come and help us each day, which was invaluable. So we did crowdfunding. The National Australia Bank gave us an award of $10,000. We had donations. We had all kinds of things to help us get through this, but we did use GoFundMe, and they do take a portion. You just have to live with that. But that also helped us get some international funds. People got kind of wise to that and donated straight to our bank account as well. The general treatments that we started with was antibiotics for those horses that had severe lesions and or penetrating wounds. Not all horses got antibiotics, and we took them off as soon as we could. We used flunixin, Banamine, or phenidine twice daily as needed for pain and shock. We tried to switch over to phenylbutazone. We ended up using a bit of IM ketamine, which I found to be very helpful. We tried some morphine-like products, and we found that the horses got colic on it, so we didn't do that. We didn't have the respiratory problems that you will often see in these fires because our fire was so fast-moving that it blew the smoke away right away. So we can't really address that. IV fluids were given on the first 2 days as needed for shock, get them rehydrated. We just anything that didn't look quite right, we did. We did the ulcer medicines. We kind of hired in somebody to look at the nutrition, and we increased their calories as well as some of the minerals that might help with skin. And then we put them out on our lawn every night to eat and to walk around, and that was kind of more the mental health kind of issue. As you can see, over on the right-hand side is our worst horse, Ash, and you can't even see how much she's burned, but she's burned way up on her hip, well above those lines that you're seeing. On the left, you'll see one of our people that helped us with getting all these horses fed every day. And then the lower left, an IV set. We aren't fancy where we are, and we didn't have enough space for everybody to be inside, so we made do. The hooves were really a consideration. I wasn't sure what was going to happen with these, and there was nothing recorded to say. So I examined the feet. We took radiographs, and then we noticed that while that was separating out, and it was really separating out, they didn't suffer any severe rotation, and they actually were never painful on it, except for on day 28, the horse that's toe pointing, she was painful because her bandage hurt. And once we took the bandage off, she was okay again. All the horses recovered. It took about 6 months for the whole hoof to grow out. And as it grew out, they got abscesses in the last few weeks. Once those were cleaned up, they went on and they're perfectly fine. You would never know they'd had any problems. We were given all kinds of products. Some of them were really good and some of them weren't. We found that raw honey, and this is what Dr. Greenwood had suggested, was just as good as Manuka for our particular cases. That's not true for everything, but for our cases, raw honey was fine, and Manuka honey there just probably wasn't enough Manuka honey in all of South Australia for our needs. We were using liters and liters a day. we were given some drugs and some products that we didn't end up using very much. We might try them, but if they didn't work, we didn't use them. But all in all, it was really good. We got a lot of donations from people, and we found that especially bath emollients and things that would make the skin soft helped quite a bit. So the products we used flamazine or silvazine. We used raw honey. Aloe vera was very painful to the horses initially, and we used corticosteroid creams, but we didn't find it very helpful. And then again, we used the sorboline, which is the Australian moisturizer. To clean the horses, we used an Amway product called LOC. It's very mild, and that was the one product that didn't make their skin red and they didn't stomp when they had it. We used that to clean off the eschar and keep the wounds clean each day. Just to show you the severity, the horse that we showed earlier, Ash, ended up with burns all up and down her legs, up in to her anus, down in her mammary glands. And over time she healed. One of the wounds that just wouldn't heal was in between her thighs and went up towards her mammary glands. And we tried every product known to man. And then one day we said, no, we're not going to do anything. We never touched it. We left it completely alone. It didn't get cleaned, and it healed up within a week or two. So you got to be careful what you ask for. I wanted a little sorboline to kind of finish Ash off because she had split her skin from dryness. And somehow these are 20-liter jars. This all showed up one day. We ended up sharing it with some other veterinary clinics that were having issues. We had a range of skin conditions. We had horses that just lost the hair. We had horses that lost way more than the hair. We had penetrating wounds. And in the case on the right, that's an ear, and eventually that ear contracted. This is Ash's leg. She was the worst again, and we were contemplating doing some skin grafts, but we found that she was so violent about getting anything done to her that we just kind of let nature take its course. And if you look on the very left, you'll see some little white dots. Well, that's the start of the skin, and that eventually all completely grew out. In most areas she got hair, but there's some areas that she still doesn't have hair today. We use chucks as a bandaging application, and that was very economical. Dr. Cheryl Rosiak suggested that. What we would do is smear on our flamazine and or honey, and those were the two products we used mostly. Most of the horses responded better to honey, but there's a couple that liked flamazine better. And then we would bandage that on top of put that on top of the leg and then wrap over the top of that. And that was a really good way to do it. We started off using sterile chucks. We'd just take them and individually sterilize them. But towards the end, we just used clean ones. When each day we would sedate the horse and we would scrub them with the LOC and sometimes a little bit of sorboline to soften the skin and removing the scabs. And we would take possibly an hour, hour and a half per horse to get this all done.
Well, you're not ticklish, isn't that?
You don't know whether he likes it or not.
Some of it, sometimes the horses acted like they liked it. You can see little Ash on the right-hand side kind of holding her head like that itching felt kind of good. They did get a pruritic phase or an itchy phase, and Racalin oral was excellent. We would do 5 mLs of Racalin on a horse. They get a bit sedated for it during the day, but it really did stop the itching. If you didn't give it to her, she would, when we let her out at night, she would go over to this tree and just rub herself raw. So we ended up using quite a bit of Racalin, but that was kind of several weeks into it. Before then, there wasn't much. So Ash split her skin one day. There was no place where she could do this with trauma. It went up inside her groin, up inside her axillary area and then on the back of her knees. We lost months with that. And so we learned our lesson about keeping the skin really softened. We used if some fans were donated, horses would stand there all day and just let the air breathe over them. All the time we were doing this in the first few months, it was over 37 degrees, at least the first 2 weeks. So we ended up using hides, which are these kind of pre-made, almost skin-like blankets for horses. And we found that once they got those on, they actually felt a lot better and they wanted to move. Found them quite valuable. Dr. Greenwood had looked at them and thought they were really good. And despite the fact they're black, they don't sweat underneath, except for under the logo. So when a horse is ready to go home, what happens? You got to be prepared for that. And the problem we had was this horse was ready to go home, but there was no home. The home had been burnt. There were no fences. There were no nothing. So she ended up staying several weeks longer than we had planned or that we wanted because there was no place for her to go. So this is something that you have to plan for. We had a party after everybody was gone and everything was done. We gave all of the people that helped us hats. Interestingly enough, they didn't really like them because they felt guilty. Everybody felt like they hadn't done enough. All of our products that we had left over, we forwarded to other veterinary clinics that were having fires later after ours. This is Ash. A year later, she's had a foal, and we did breed her while she was there. And curiously enough, that once she got in foal, her skin started to improve dramatically, probably pregnancy hormones. So the lessons learned. The surface area was not predictive of how things were going to go. We didn't know the coronary band diffusion and the separation also wasn't a problem. It was about 2 weeks before we realized how bad things were going to be. You just couldn't tell at the beginning. Infection wasn't a problem except for the penetrating wounds. Corneal ulcers were transient, a couple weeks and they were gone. And we didn't have respiratory complications. So skincare lesions. Raw honey worked well in the early period. Cotton fiber cloths could be used. Mild detergents were helpful in cleaning the burns. Lightweight bandages were superior, less expensive and bulky. And the use of moisturizers was critical to keep the skin splitting. So general lessons learned. Long-term use of non-steroidal anti-inflammatories. We didn't get any signs of toxicity. Now we did use omeprazole almost the whole time to prevent gastric ulcers. It's very intensive. It's long-term. You have to prepare your staff, the owners, and even the volunteers. It was a bit traumatic. And 4 months later, our last horse went home. So the references that I can provide are in the AAP in 2016. I produced a article about using social media to help us finance and to staff and get all the donations that we needed for these horses. And then in 2018, I wrote a paper called Findings and Strategies for Treating Horses Injured in Open Range Fires, and that's an equine veterinary education. It is online. Sometimes they make it a free one that you can see, and sometimes not. If you have any other questions, call Adelaide Plains Equine Clinic, or there's my email address. Thank you very much. Just to show you, these are some of the horses after the fire was over, and months later, to show you that all the horses at our clinic recovered and did really well. Some are competing, some have had foals. It's a range, but they all became sound except for one horse who had a carpal injury at the same time. And that's her there, actually. Thank you very much.
Let's go,